Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports, NFL, and college football analyst, former offensive lineman, and you can hear him on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Let's see. He's had the Broncos-Bills game on Westwood One on Monday night. He's got Coastal Carolina and Army this Saturday, and he'll be at Iowa and Nebraska for CBS on Black Friday. The peripatetic Ross Tucker joining us on the program. All right, let me go back to the Buffalo Broncos game. What did you see with Buffalo's offense that would get Ken Dorsey fired?
Well, it's interesting in that game in particular, Dan, because I saw a bunch of drops by the Bills receivers. I mean, you think about the first interception by Josh Allen. The Bills are moving the ball. They're in scoring range. It went right through Gabe Davis's hands. That's not Ken Dorsey's fault. Now, I will say this, Dan, I don't know that Dorsey's doing a great job. You talk to people schematically. I think Dorsey's probably just okay. The thing that's always laughable to me about that is it's not his fault that Dalton Kincaid had the drop or Latavius Murray had the drop, or even that Sean McDermott, 3rd and long, the Broncos are already out of field goal range. He calls an all-out blitz, cover 0, to put his guy, Taron Johnson, in that position for the pass interference. And I'm pretty sure also, Dan, that Ken Dorsey wasn't the 12th guy on the field on the missed field goal. So what I really strongly dislike about pro football is if they win that game, he doesn't get fired. So think about that. If they win that game, he doesn't get fired, but they lost. So McDermott, quote unquote, has to do something. So he makes Dorsey the scapegoat, makes Dorsey the sacrificial lamb. Just not a fan of that. Never have been. Sometimes they'll just like randomly fire a couple position coaches just so that they appease the fans or the media and show that they're doing something.
Are the Bills fixable?
I don't think so this year. No, I don't know that having a new play caller in Brady, who didn't really do a great job in Carolina, is gonna solve that. You know what else too? I was just thinking about this, Dan. I think this is one of the issues on some level when you have a defensive head coach. And it's a shame because I'm not anti-defensive head coaches, but if you have a defensive-minded head coach and your team has success, that probably means you're scoring points and the offense is doing well. Well, then that guy's going to get hired away. That guy's going to go like Daboll to the Giants, and then you have to get a new play caller, a new guy, and just sometimes that transition does not go as smoothly, and it hasn't for Buffalo.
And I don't know if a new coordinator can change Josh Allen's style, because it just feels like this is who he is. He's going to take chances. He tries to improvise. He wants a splash play. And I don't know if you could say, hey, like if Bill Belichick was coaching the Bills, could he say to Josh Allen, you're going to throw the ball 15 times max tonight? How do you think that would go over?
I don't think it would go over very well at all. And I don't think that the Bills would move the ball very effectively, although they did run it pretty well Monday night. I totally agree, Dan. To me, Josh Allen, like we're at the, and I want to be careful how I say this. I'm not saying Josh Allen's a much better player than Carson Wentz, much better. But, you know, I do a lot of Philadelphia media stuff. And he was so good in 2017. He could have been the MVP if he didn't get hurt. And then 2018 and 2019, he would just have these games where he'd have these silly turnovers and these wild decisions. You're like, what's he doing? But then he went to, Indy and the same thing happened. He went to Washington, same thing happened. Like at some point you just acknowledge Carson Wentz is going to make stupid mistakes. That's just part of who he is. Totally agree with you, Dan. Josh Allen is going to turn the football over at times. Now he's still worth it. He's still a top 5 quarterback. He's still a fantastic player. But I think we have to get to the point. He's got the most turnovers over the last 6 years since he's been a starter. He has the most turnovers the last 2 years. Like at some point, this is just who he is. Could they maybe get another coordinator in there that will help him dial that back a little bit? Probably, but he's been playing a lot of football now for a long time, and he's just aggressive, and he's just going to make some mistakes that you don't want to see him make.
Thursday night football, the Bengals getting 3.5 against the Ravens. What's the one thing that you're looking for tonight?
Probably all of the injuries and the impact on the game. I don't think it's being talked about enough, but Ronnie Stanley's not going to play at left tackle for the Ravens tonight. Marlon Humphrey's doubtful, so I doubt he plays. So the Ravens don't have their left tackle and their best corner. We know T. Higgins won't play for the Bengals. It sounds like Hendrickson's going to try to play, but that has a big impact on the game. I mean, no Marlon Humphrey against those receivers for the Bengals is tough for the Ravens. And then you don't have Ronnie Stanley, but the Bengals do have Trey Hendrickson. The other thing about it is, it's an important game for both teams, but if the Bengals lose this game, they're in a bad spot, Dan. I mean, they lose this game. What do they drop to 5-5 at that point? And they're on the outside looking in for the playoffs. The losses by both these teams on Sunday, and especially the way in which they lost, that actually makes tonight's game bigger and more important than if they had both won last week.
We're talking to Ross Tucker, Westwood One CBS sports analyst with college football and the NFL. I'm just trying to figure out who's the MVP now. I know we like to do this. We get ahead of ourselves, like first month of the season, MVP candidates, and then, guys tend to fall off and then reappear. Who is the mid-season MVP in your opinion at any position?
So the MVP we know usually goes to a quarterback, and I would imagine that it still will.
But let's not do that. Let's give it to the person you think is the most valuable, not it goes to the quarterback.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, because I do think that A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill should be mentioned. I actually, though, think if we're really talking about the most valuable player in the league to this point, I think it's C.J. Stroud. I mean, the Texans were terrible the last couple of years. Now they're 5-4. They host the Cardinals. If they win that game and they're favored, they'll be 6-4 and in the playoff race.
Yeah.
I know we always look at the top of the standings, right? To me, Dan, C.J. Stroud is almost like the Jaden Daniels of the NFL right now, right? Like Jaden Daniels, the LSU kid, he's been the best player this year. He deserves to win the Heisman. He's been the best player in college football, but he's not undefeated like Penix Jr. or J.J. McCarthy, and I get that. But Jaden Daniels should win the Heisman. Right now, C.J. Stroud's been the most valuable player. The Texans were terrible. He has totally changed the entire perception of that franchise single-handedly. And they had injuries on the O-line. They had a bunch of games where they didn't have either tackle. Their receivers we thought were pedestrian. He's making Noah Brown and these guys, Tank Dell, look like stars. There has not been a more valuable player in the National Football League this year than C.J. Stroud, the quarterback for the Houston Texans. He probably won't win it, but he's the most valuable player so far in my mind.
One of the Broncos receiver, Cortland Sutton, I think, said that we owe Russell Wilson an apology. Does the media owe Russell Wilson an apology?
No. He was awful last year. I mean, unless you're going to say that was all entirely because of Nathaniel Hackett and that it wasn't Russell Wilson's fault, but he was still the guy pulling the trigger. He was still the guy playing. And I don't think he's playing great this year. I mean, look, he's way better than he was last year. He's not a top 5 quarterback, probably still not even a top 10 quarterback. Last year, he was a bottom 5 player at that position. He's played much better. I don't think we owe him an apology. I think we probably owe Sean Payton a lot of credit. I mean, Sean Payton, this is why he's getting $18 million a year. They literally are paying Payton that much because they wanted to see it. I think the Broncos thought if anyone can maximize whatever's still left in Russell Wilson, it's Sean Payton. And you know what, Dan? He's doing it. I mean, they're not crazy numbers, but he's got, 4 times more touchdowns than he does interceptions. He's taking care of the football. They're winning games now. I think Peyton deserves a lot of credit, more so than giving Russell Wilson an apology. Just call it like it is. He's playing better than last year, and he deserves credit for that.
Are the Browns cursed?
Yeah, I think they are. Because it's not just Deshaun Watson, Dan. I mean, they lost both offensive tackles, Conklin and Wills. They lose Nick Chubb earlier. We know this is like a make or break year for their head coach, Kevin Stefanski, and their GM, Andrew Berry. You're going to lose both tackles, your star running back. And after your best win in probably 3 years, since the playoff win against the Steelers, your best win in 2 or 3 years, where your franchise quarterback is perfect in the second half. You come from behind against the division-leading Ravens. Then we find out Wednesday, out of the blue, he has to have shoulder surgery. He's done for the year. Why can't the Browns have nice things? Their fans are unbelievable. They have like the most loyal fans. They have done almost nothing since the Browns came back in 99 for those people to still be as diehard and as loyal as they are. They've had like 2 halfway decent years that whole time, and the fans are finally fired up, finally excited. I mean, that must have been one of the all-time punches in the gut. 9 a.m. yesterday morning, Browns fans are feeling as good as they felt in years, and then boom, it's like when you get punched in the stomach and you're not ready, almost like a pie in the face, and you're not ready for it.
If you had to bet on Bill Belichick's future, where would you bet?
I would bet that he is the head coach for either the Washington Commanders or the Carolina Panthers next year. I think there's a decent chance. That is not a patient owner in Carolina. Frank Reich, Dan, when you watch him talk, he kind of looks like a guy that knows he might be one and done. He really does. And I think as bad as it's been for New England this year, I think Tepper and Harris, their hedge fund backgrounds enable them to not let one bad year affect what someone's done in a larger sample size, a larger body of work. Those guys have both had a bad year in their hedge funds every once in a while, right? And I think that they believe that Belichick gives them instant credibility. He would hopefully set the record for wins while he's coaching them. I think he coaches one of those 2 franchises next year.
Great to talk to you. Safe travels. Thanks.
Always. Thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate it.
Ross Tucker, our good buddy. The Ross Tucker Football Podcast can be found on social media at Ross Tucker, Ross Tucker NFL. Westwood One, CBS Sports NFL college football analyst. Always great to talk to him.